Good morning, y'all. Thanks for coming back to my channel. I'm just going to show you some clips off of this website called BirdCast, and it's connected to the Cornell Laboratories of Ornithology. This time of year, the birds are migrating. This particular video talks about how to use BirdCast and also things that we can do here on the ground to keep the migrants safe as they are traveling. And they travel at night. And so turning the lights out is one of the most important things we can do to help our feathered friends make it safely to where they're going to go to nest and breed and help us take care of our gardens by eating insects and enjoy singing, and we get the blessing of all their songs. So I hope you'll enjoy these few little clips from this. And this evening, as you sit on your couch listening to me reading to y'all by the wood stove, please turn the lights out. Okay, here we go.
All right. So I'm going to be walking through the migration dashboard just a little bit for folks who might not have visited in a while or maybe are new to it. We first launched the dashboard just about a year ago. We actually gave a talk introducing it for the first time to you all. So it's nice to be able to revisit it. I wanted to kind of review kind of what products BirdCast had up until we launched the dashboard. For a while, we've been able to provide forecasts of migration intensity over the next few nights to give a sense of what we think might happen. That's what these are. Some of you may recognize those, as well as a sense of what has already happened the night before throughout the night. But both of these are on an overall, fully national level, and can't really tell you what's happening right in the moment. It's either a look to the future or a look into the past. So one of the things that the dashboard has been able to give us is more of a view into what's happening right now on any given night when it comes to bird migration. And we can show a lot more granular data, as well as showing it on down to a county level for any county in the contiguous United States. So I just kind of wanted to walk through it and highlight some of the things that you might be able to poke around on your own in your free time.
So she's going to explain about using it, but all the information is actually on the website. It's such an amazing thing. So they're using the data from the National Weather Service. So at this time, BirdCast is only available in the lower 48. It does not cover what's going on in Mexico. It does not cover what's going on in Canada or any place else on the planet, unfortunately. However, if you're listening to me from the other side of the pond, the lights out still is applicable to you. Okay, I'm going to pause this here and see if I can find another interesting little thing to click on within this video. But please, I'll put the link for this below. And hold on.
About 1 in 4 birds, or about 3 billion birds, lost since 1970 in under the span of a single human lifetime, many of these being migratory birds. And what with BirdCast's preoccupation with forecasting when and where a lot of these migratory birds are moving, we hope that you're able to use our tools in order to better understand and react to these birds to help protect them. One of the major sources of mortality for these birds is collision, which is a problem anywhere there are buildings, residences, power lines, wind turbines, etc., especially among buildings and residences, which amount to hundreds of millions of estimated collisions in the U.S. annually. And BirdCast can help us better understand when birds are going to be passing these buildings in particular, or these wind turbines in particular, so we know better where to site wind turbines, when buildings should react in a certain way to birds passing through. And here you can see a couple of examples of what happens when we don't have these sort of safeguarding conservation practices in effect. Unfortunately, light pollution is an implicating factor in collisions, as light pollution, well, let me go back a couple of steps. A lot of migratory birds, the majority of them, about 80% of North American migratory birds, migrate at night, navigating using the stars and other natural signals. And the light pollution coming from our urban centers can draw them away from their normal pathways towards these sort of urban hazards, including building collisions and collisions with residences and exposures to toxins and such. Our focus on this page is some of the major mass mortality building collisions that have happened where light pollution has been implicated over the last couple of years. And so if you take a look on the left, you can see a terribly sad example in Manhattan from 2021. This is a collision monitor out in the morning collecting hundreds and hundreds of birds. Here's an article in the middle about a similar event in Philadelphia that killed likely upwards of 1,000 in a single night as well. And to the far right, you can see something that's a little more personal to me here in Texas, a collision that happened in 2017 at a single lit building during a migration night of poor weather, which killed nearly 400 birds in a single night. And so here you can see a little bit of the effect that these lights have on birds. The video that is playing to the left is actually of the 9/11 Memorial and Tribute in Light in New York City, which shines every year on 9/11 and consists of some very, very bright xenon lights. And what you're seeing swirling in these lights is not, in fact, insects, but rather birds sort of trapped in these beams. Endlessly circling, which is very unfortunate in exhausting them, distracting them, etc., and generally distracting from their natural behavior. We've been working with New York City Audubon and the Memorial and Light for the last several years in order to monitor, film, and deal with this phenomenon. The good news is that turning off these lights very rapidly returns birds to normal behavior, and they disperse very quickly. Off non-essential lighting during migration from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. And where it's not possible to turn things off to keep them low, long, or shielded.
And I just put the link to the Lights Out website in the chat so everybody can check that out and bookmark it to see all of the different things they could do at their own homes.
Thank you. So here's an example of one of the ways that BirdCast has been working on Lights Out. We've been heavily involved in coordinating the Lights Out Texas effort, working with cities, building owners and managers, as well as the community and residences in Texas, given a conservation need of high migration volume and high light pollution in Texas. And so what you can see in this little animation is spring 2021, the Dallas mayor issued a Lights Out proclamation in Dallas, which he's been doing for the last couple of seasons, asking city buildings to turn off their lights during peak migration nights.
In terms of just a little background, we know that from the radar perspective and monitoring the skies above the contiguous U.S., that we have these 143 radars that are monitoring the skies almost continuously. They're detecting meteorology and biology up there, and in the spring and fall, the biology is often dominated by birds, and we can filter out the weather. So when you see a map like this, in this case, the what we call the observed or live map from last night, you're seeing that weather removed, and I'll talk about this in a second, but let me just highlight it's pretty uneven, right? So even a very cursory view of this map, you can see there are some places where there are these black colors or dark, the purples, which is either very little or no migration happening. And that's in stark contrast to these areas where the really intense yellows and whites are, which is really high intensity migration, and that it's not evenly distributed around the country. And so last night in particular, it was still a reasonably good night, mostly with birds migrating in the southern U.S. with a little bit of an edge up through the Great Plains there. But talking about 1/3 of a billion birds aloft last night, so pretty big number when it comes down to it. Sort of thinking along the lines of like one bird for every human in the U.S. moving last night. Pretty amazing. Now, related to this pattern, and by the way, this is sort of expected for this time of the year. Early May is really starting to be a time when we're seeing the peak of birds arriving into the southern U.S. and the movement starting to really percolate in waves up farther to the north.
I'm just going to show you briefly one other clip here. there's a weather pattern that is forming now, which is known as an omega pattern, where there's a system on the west coast and a system on the east coast keeping, kind of blocking in the weather pattern that we have. But from Texas going up through Nebraska and towards the Dakotas and Montana, there's going to be a flow of warm air. So I'm imagining over the nights to come, if y'all go on this website, you're going to see the birds migrating along in that same pattern based on what he's going to tell us here in this next clip. This is just about light and weather. This is not even touching on the fact that the magnetic poles on our planet are shifting, and the birds and other species, mammals, insects, also use the magnetics in order to travel around our planet. So do not be surprised in the coming months and years if you're seeing more reports of beached whales and lost animals and animals unusual to the area showing up, and it's because they're navigating using a magnetic system that is in fluctuation on our planet right now. And if you don't know about that, just Google magnetic poles shifting and you can find some information on that. But let me go ahead and turn this back on and before it fades out.
Around the country. And so last night in particular, it was still a reasonably good night, mostly with birds migrating in the southern U.S. with a little bit of an edge up through the Great Plains there. But talking about 1/3 billion birds aloft last night, so pretty big number when it comes down to it. Sort of thinking along the lines of like 1 bird for every human in the U.S. moving last night. Pretty amazing. Now, related to this pattern, and by the way, this is sort of expected for this time of the year. Early May is really starting to be a time when we're seeing the peak of birds arriving into the southern U.S. and the movement starting to really percolate in waves up farther to the north. So with that in mind, thinking a little bit about, well, why do we see this really odd pattern where some places have no migration, others have really intense migration? It's pretty simple when it comes down to it. The places on the map where you see the dark areas of very low intensity or no migration in the spring, right, last night, that's associated with these cold air masses where temperatures are cool. Birds usually experience headwinds, so winds blowing from the north as birds are trying to move generally north. That's not really conducive to birds making much progress in terms of migration. Whereas where you see intense migration, in where these red circles are, those are warmer temperatures, warm air masses, nice moist air masses, sort of very typical of what we think of as spring and summer, like in some respects. And also with tailwinds, so winds generally blowing from the south, often supporting birds' movements as they head north. So that's just kind of one way to think about, well, how do I make sense of where these movements are going to occur or why they've occurred in particular locations broadly? It has to do with this weather meteorology at sort of a larger scale, a regional or a continental scale, or synoptic scale, as some people
So
will
right
call
here in this video, you can see what I mentioned about it: less migration on the west, less migration towards the east, and that flow, that steady flow coming up from Texas going right through Nebraska into the Dakotas and the eastern part of Montana, and it's based on what's happening with the weather systems. Okay, enough science, please. Go visit the websites if you're interested in helping birds. Turn the lights out. Love you all very much. See you tonight by the wood stove. Till then.